This is the Joint Planning and Zoning Committee and Special Call Committee of the Whole meeting for December 11th. It is about 3:40 p.m. The meeting is hereby called to order. Approval of the minutes from our October, I believe it was 23rd meeting. Did y'all have a chance to look those over?
Yes, I look for approval.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion for approval that has been properly seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. So the minutes are approved. Zoning cases, we have our first case on Parkway East. Mr. Togmas.
So for the record, Christian Togmas, I'm one of the planners. I serve as one of the planners. So this is case CAC 2024-11. This is the Mavis rezoning in the Roebuck neighborhood. So the property is located at 9186 Parkway East, and it's an out parcel within the Roebuck Marketplace Shopping Plaza. So the applicant is Nate Fuss, and the owner is Roebuck Out Parcel LLC. They're requesting to change the zone district boundaries from MUH, which is mixed use high, to C2, which is general commercial district, in order to allow for the use of an automobile service station. The subject property includes one parcel containing approximately 1.20 acres. The surrounding zoning is all MUH. Again, that's mixed use high on all four sides. So Mavis Discount Tire is primarily a retail sale of tires. Additionally, they sell brakes, shocks, struts, and exhaust systems. They perform oil changes and replace fluids, but no engine work. Scrap tires will be stored inside and removed once a week, and cars will not be stored outside. The hours of operation will be Monday to Friday, 8 a.m. to 6 p.m., Saturday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., and Sunday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. The store will employ approximately 7 to 10 people. The adopted long-range land use plan identifies the property as mixed-use high. So this use is permitted with conditions in C2, and the following conditions shall be met per the City of Birmingham zoning ordinance. So the first condition is no visibly disabled, abandoned, or inoperable vehicles shall be stored on the premises. And the second is no vehicle to be serviced shall remain on the premises more than 15 days. Now, the proposed use requires one parking space per 500 square feet of gross floor area, which equates to 14 spaces maximum allowed. So the site plan does show 37 parking spaces, which is 23 parking spaces over the maximum allowed. However, there was an approved parking modification from the ZBA earlier this year in January of 2024, which allowed 47 parking spaces. So in addition to that parking modification, the ZBA also granted the following. A proposed building does not extend across at least 75% of the lot frontage, parking in the front yard setback of 79.5 feet instead of the 15-foot maximum. And the last one, no stacking bays are provided for bays 5 to 8. And I'm going to go read through the staff comments. So Landscape reviewed it, and they are requiring one tree per 40 feet of frontage. This includes plantings along Parkway East and Roebuck Plaza Drive. Now, from stormwater, excuse me, all permits and ordinances shall apply for any new construction, including the City of Birmingham Soil Erosion Control Permit, Civil Construction Permit, Stormwater Permit. Requirements will apply, including certifications from the design engineer. A post-construction runoff shall not exceed pre-project runoff for the 1, 2, 10, and 25-year storm events. And the 100-year storm shall safely pass the system. The LID practices are required for the parking space areas that are greater than the requirement for the parking space count. And compliance with the post-construction stormwater ordinance is required. Now, from floodplain, the subject property is not located within a special flood hazard area. And from Birmingham Department of Transportation, they are requiring an access easement to be recorded when the parcel is platted. Now, this property is located within the Northeast Framework Plan area. The applicant did go before the Roebuck Neighborhood Association at its regularly scheduled meeting on October 14, 2024, and they voted 14 votes to support and 1 to not support. Now, these are some possible queue conditions, so if recommended for approval, the committee should consider the following queue conditions. So 1, if approved, the applicant must provide an access easement upon recording of the plat. 2, if approved due to the excess of parking by 23 parking spaces, the applicant must incorporate low-impact development techniques to reduce runoff at a rate established in the City of Birmingham Engineering Design Guidelines. And number 3, if approved, the following conditions shall be met per the City of Birmingham zoning ordinance, Article 2, Section 5.f, 1 to 2, as follows. Again, there are no visibly disabled, abandoned, or operable vehicles shall be stored on the premises, and no vehicle to be serviced shall remain on the premises more than 15 days. Now, the applicant went before the Zoning Advisory Committee on November 19th, and they voted to approve the request, 4 votes to approve and 0 against, with those 3 key conditions.
Okay, can you repeat again why we need to move from mixed-use high to C2 when all those districts allow an automobile service shop if they meet those 2 conditions?
Yes,
What
I
about
think,
the no visibly disabled and the no vehicle remaining more than 15 days?
yes.
If they're already allowed to do that in a mixed-use high, why are we changing the zoning?
So I think this was rezoned back in 2015, and I think the city did want mixed use in that area. I think, however, I don't think any of that has really gone that way. So I think it should have been, there was a lot of C2 there, and I don't think the development has really caught up with the mixed use high in that area. And like I said, this was zoned MUH back in 2015 as part of the Northeast Framework Plan area.
Okay, but
I'd be happy to speak to that if you'd like,
that's
Counselor
good
Abbott.
because they're allowed in both zone districts.
Well, they're not allowed any, I'm Kim Sproul. I serve as the Natural Hazards Administrator in the Department of Planning, Engineering, and Permits. So when we made the updates this summer to the mixed-use districts, we removed those auto-dependent uses from our mixed use. So it's no longer allowed in our mixed-use districts, which is why they're requesting the change to C2. But back to 2015, when this area was rezoned to mixed use, it was our goal to see this as it further redeveloped into a mixed use area, kind of on its own, adjacent from our downtown mixed use area. But the transition for that area has not occurred. It's stayed. All of the uses out there have stayed predominantly C2, general commercial uses. We've also had at least 5 to 10 ZBA cases to request variances from the mixed use requirements in this particular area. So the trend is actually to keep it commercial instead of a high density mixed use area as we originally perceived it back in 2015.
So will it all be changed, or just will nickel and dime it as it comes along?
I think when we revisit, as we finish the framework plans and the framework plan rezoning in early 2025, we're going to reevaluate, go back to those first framework plans that we started right after 2015 and do the windshield surveys again, do the land use surveys, and see if there are any changes that need to be made. And this will most likely be one of those areas that we will have to look at to changing the zoning from mixed use to general commercial.
Okay, I was just trying to figure it out because
It's confusing how it's
the way
flip-flopped.
it reads, it says in the following districts, mixed use, low, medium, high, C2, so all those are all, an automobile service shop is permitted.
That was changed with, do you guys remember the mixed use amendments we added this summer when we added the urban neighborhood district, and then we took out the auto-centric uses from our mixed use districts.
Okay.
So this particular use is no longer permitted in mixed use, which is why they have to rezone the property.
Okay. It's a little bit confusing.
Yes, ma'am. We're gonna try to clean it all up. But they had actually come to us over a year ago, and the use was allowed at that point, when they originally came and we started talking about the development. And then when the permitted uses table changed this summer, when we updated those mixed-use districts with the urban neighborhood district, it took it out. So, they're actually doing their due diligence, trying to get their project zoned appropriately so they can get moving.
Okay, and it's being built in the parking lot,
That's correct.
and that's why the 37 parking spaces are being left alone, because it's already a parking lot?
That, it's one giant sea of, they've just carved out a lot from that giant parcel with the shopping center on it.
Okay. Do members of the committee have questions? Dr. O'Quinn?
Yeah, so everything around it is still mixed use high,
Correct.
but it's legal non-conforming, I guess. I don't know. I'm asking the question, is the existing shopping center, if it's, basically functions as general commercial, is because it's, not mixed use high currently, is it considered legal non-conforming?
Yes.
Okay. So with it being the stormwater recommendations or the stormwater comments,
What page are they
because
on?
it's, the pages aren't numbered, but these are, I'm looking at the staff comments, relative to stormwater, but I know, we have standards for these oil change, places in terms of managing, runoff and, standards for accommodating any spills or anything like that. That's, would all be in effect, right?
I believe so, yeah, that's why they have that standard comment there
Okay.
on stormwater.
I think that's all I have.
Counselor Smitherman, do you have any questions?
Yes, Madam Chair, I guess just to check off everything, I'm looking at the zoning advisory committee. Do they have a access easement?
Not at the moment, so that's why we put that as a Q condition.
Okay, gotcha. How soon do you think they'll be able to get it? Is that the right question?
No worries. You wanna come to the,
Okay, good.
It'll be part of the closing agreement. They're purchasing the property from the shopping center owner.
Yeah.
So they can provide that agreement at any time.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, and you're the,
And my name is Nate Fuss. I'm with Bowler Engineering. I'm on behalf of my client, Mavis.
okay,
Okay.
thank you.
Okay,
We just wanted to know who we were hearing from.
right.
Civil engineer.
Okay, do you have anything that you want to add to this discussion, or?
No, they provided a pretty good intro. Yeah, I mean, I think, as Kim mentioned, we're here because the uses changed on us. We got the variances originally, and then they changed, so now we're back. The project was put a little bit on hold, but they're excited to get moving here. Hopefully, once we get an approval in January, we'll get plans submitted. But other than that, we're trying to make the shopping center look a little bit nicer, not like they said, not a sea of asphalt. Put a nice use in that corner there, some landscaping around there, some sidewalks, so, that's about all I've got to add.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
could you elaborate on that? Because, I know that in the staff comments, it says 1 tree per 40 feet of street frontage. But, it is a sea of parking, and I guess, there are probably a few trees in the parking lot right now, but,
There's a drawing.
Yep. So Mavis
Okay.
will be subdividing that corner, so they'll be taking about maybe 150 feet of frontage, So they'll plant their entire frontage to meet that, that staff comment of 1 tree per 40 feet of the Mavis frontage. So it
Okay.
won't be the whole lot, you know, it'll kind of be from the intersection about 150, 200 feet to where that Mavis frontage is.
Got it. Counselor Abbott pointed me to the landscape plan.
Well, there's a pile of stuff here.
Yeah,
And then to answer your, not to confuse, but to answer your comment on the stormwater, the Mavis tires, they don't have any floor drains internally, so if there's any oil spills internal to the building, they clean them with a dry handling, method, kind of like with a kitty litter or whatever. And they, have a truck company, the third-party company that comes once a week and cleans any spilled oil. And then, you know, outside of the building, we'll meet the LID requirements, for the parking spaces that are over the minimum requirement. And we'll be adding grassed areas, so, we'll be decreasing the, post-development flow, stormwater flow.
Counselor Smitherman?
I don't know, I don't think this is a question for you. I guess my thoughts and questions are around the condition that they can't have abandoned vehicles, et cetera, on the premises for more than 15 days. Who's going to check to make sure that they're in compliance?
I believe that would be zoning enforcement, but it is a condition for
Okay.
this in C2. And I don't know if you can speak to Mavis, like they usually
Yeah,
don't.
the general manager will be aware, and,
Okay.
you know, they, like you say, they don't really do heavy engine work, so they're mainly, like Christian said, was just tires and brakes, so most people have an appointment that they come in, might leave their car overnight, or might, you know,
Yeah.
drop it off, and they have an appointment in the day, and they'll pick it up, then get dropped off the next day, but, you know, nobody's really coming there with a
Right.
broken down car or anything like that where they would leave it overnight, so, the general manager will be aware,
Okay.
of the, I think there was 2 conditions relating to the
Okay.
abandoned cars and vehicles being stored there.
Okay, that's awesome, thank you.
Anything else? I heard you mention sidewalks,
Yep.
but I don't see any. Do they go anywhere?
Not really. There's there's not really any existing sidewalks out there, but there's a main entrance kind of on the east side of the building connecting to both sides of the parking lot on the top and bottom, and then there'll be a little sidewalk on the left side as well.
So a person on foot could cross the street, I guess.
There won't be any added. There's not any really existing infrastructure or any existing sidewalks out there to tie into.
Okay, so you're gonna put sidewalks in and hope other people do too.
Hopefully.
I guess that's what the city's hoping for anyway. Okay, well, I just wondered because I couldn't see them on the landscape plan, but.
Yeah,
Okay,
it's kind of that, if you're looking at the landscape plan, it's just on the right side of the building there, right by the ADA spaces. Where that double door on the side is.
Okay, I don't see a double door, but I'm gonna take your word for it that it's there.
Counselor, would you like to see this right here?
Well, I think that's what I'm looking at.
Yeah, this is the big.
That's a larger version.
Yours is bigger. Oh, okay, so the sidewalks are in there.
I believe it's right here. Right on the side there, right where that door is.
Oh, I gotcha. Okay. Okay, does anyone have anything else? Any other questions or comments? Do I hear a motion?
Yes, motion to send this to the full council for approval or for consideration with a recommendation for approval.
Second,
With the Q conditions,
Yes.
with the Q conditions.
second.
Okay, it has been moved and properly seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. So that item passes. Thank you. Now, our next item is the zoning text amendment for short-term rentals. Ms. Burrell, tell us your new title again. I keep on,
I'm sorry, I am the Natural Hazards Administrator, so I'll be working in our floodplain and hazard mitigation section of our watershed division. Not to confuse you.
as soon as you finish with all this other stuff.
Right, so like our CRS program, and then, we do our hazard mitigation when there are severe weather events, and we're part of the planning team for our special events. So I've just kind of shifted a little bit. But you won't get rid of me, not yet.
Special events are considered a natural hazard.
Well, they're actually part of hazard mitigation planning.
Okay.
So there is a planning section involved in special event planning.
All right.
So we're back again. We have case ZAC 2024-6. This is the amendment to the city zoning ordinance related to short-term rentals. This is the third draft that has come through for short-term rentals. This draft was presented to ZAC on October 15th. The difference in this draft and the previous drafts was that this draft permitted short-term rentals in all zoning districts, except there was a proposal for a 1% cap on the number of short-term rentals allowed in single-family residential districts. And that number, if it exceeded 1%, then we proposed a random selection process to select those properties that would be included in the 1%. At the ZAC meeting on October 15th, the ZAC voted to recommend the following to this committee and the city council. Number one, they voted that short-term rentals should not be permitted in any residential district. In the city code proposal, which is the separate part of the short-term rental regulations, they recommended that the local responsible party should be located with a 10-mile radius of the property instead of the 30 miles that was presented. If a random drawing is approved, the random drawing should apply to all zoning districts and not just residential districts. And if short-term rentals are not prohibited in residential districts, they should be allowed only by special exception in all districts. And those were the four recommendations that the ZAC made in October.
Okay, and do we have a copy of those recommendations here?
Yes, ma'am, they're in the, this document that's what looks like a staff report.
Okay, so what you've given us is what you proposed to the ZAC.
Right, that's kind of how our cases work. We provided the text amendment to ZAC. They requested twice that we go back and rework the draft. And so the third time they voted with those four recommendations.
Okay, so what the committee needs to decide is if we're in agreement with those recommendations, which I'm not finding here, but I'm sure it's somewhere.
I can give you this copy, Counselor Abbott.
Okay, but do y'all have them?
Yeah, it's.
There's a
so
little
this
box
page,
on the front
Flip it to the back.
that has the time schedule.
The back of this front page.
Oh, the back of the front page. There they are. I was looking in the back and not finding anything.
It's under draft number 3.
Okay, so the committee needs to determine if we're going to go along with what the ZAC has recommended to us, or whether we want to do something different, or whether, well, I guess those two are good choices. Either accept the recommendations of the ZAC or do something different. So,
What is just something different? What does that look like?
well, I mean, you know, there have been suggestions from all of these. We've had 3 or 4 public hearings.
Gotcha.
And we have heard from the residents and we've heard from the operators. And, you know, there've been lots of requests, but you'll notice from the answers to a lot of the questions that were asked by the ZAC members and the city council members and the public, that a lot of the things people were asking for are not legal. So, you know, well, you would know that being a lawyer, so. But probably the biggest thing that I've heard is that people who are living in their properties, you know, who are residents of the city, you know, have asked if they can have short-term rentals since they live here and they're residents, rather than having them removed from all residential zone districts as the ZAC recommended. Now, the ZAC's recommendation would certainly cut our complaints down to practically nothing, but we just have to decide what we want to do. The ZAC, after having heard people, I guess they had 2 public hearings by the ZAC, and they determined that not having them in our residential districts was the way to go. So we just have to decide if we agree with that or if we want some modification or what we want to do.
Okay. Can I ask, what about the educational piece of it? Has that been considered?
Yes, ma'am. So we've actually been in touch. He's actually here right now. One of our short-term rental property owners. He's actually working on an educational component that could be made available to short-term rental property owners if that's something that the council would like to see. Right now, we don't have an actual program in place to include in any of the regulations. But we have met with Judson, and he has some great ideas, and I believe he's actually working on a curriculum with UAB on a potential program that could be included for short-term rental property owners. I'm sure he could give you much more information than I could on that, but I know that that is kind of in the
He
works.
gave us a copy of, I guess, the work that's been done thus far, but I'm sure there's more to be done.
Yeah, well, I like the idea because I think a lot of times, just in general, even with business owners, even when people come before us with, I think I saw one in particular with a liquor license revocation, they didn't know, I don't know, it's not true, but a lot of times people don't know the requirements of having a business, and so I think having an educational course will help people. So I really like that component to add that.
Well, education is always good.
Right.
Dr. Quinn?
Yes, so on the education piece, is it conceivable that we could require completion of such a course as a prerequisite for application for a permit?
I would have to defer to our city attorney's office to make sure that that's something we could include in the regulations that are going to be in the city code part. That wouldn't go in the zoning ordinance part of it, but if it's legal to do so, I think that would be something we could consider.
Julie Bernard, serve as Assistant City Attorney with the Office of City Attorney. I mean, that is something that's under consideration. I mean, Mr. Young has been very, helpful in explaining his thoughts and all of that. I think we've just got to be in it with going with UAB, state priority. There may be some ways that we can do it. We've just got to be careful about how we do it, that we're not, creating special rights and privileges. So we just got to work through how we do it, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, it'd be helpful if there was like some sort of you know, accrediting agency for, you know, these types of courses that, you know, we could say you're required to take a, you know, accredited course from whatever.
Yeah, I
So-
mean, I think there can be some ways to word it generally where it gets us where we want to be. I just think we have to be careful to not be, especially if it were a private course, you know, you don't want to say you have to take a course from XYZ business.
Right.
But we will, we're looking at how to work that in.
Okay.
Because I'm thinking if we make it public, like they come to City Hall and they offer it so many times a year, then that maybe can cut it out with it being like a private course.
Yeah.
We could figure out that way.
But it may be through working through UAB, we'll still keep working with Mr.
Yeah.
Young and with everybody to try to figure out really what's the right way to fit it in.
Okay.
So, and so that we have a, yeah, because obviously he's offering us some opportunity to have some input, you know, in how that can be done so that we also meet what the city needs people to know as well, so.
Also, so as the code portion of this is currently structured, it doesn't discriminate between owner occupied or not short-term rentals, correct? So,
There are some distinctions that we do have to be, you know, the Fifth Circuit ruled against New Orleans ordinance 2 years ago, because they said you can't have a short-term rental in the city of New Orleans unless you are a resident of the city of New Orleans, and that was held to violate the Commerce Clause. They have gone back and tweaked their ordinance, and it was on appeal again. Does anybody know? I don't know if that has come out yet. Yeah, so, that, you know, so that's kind of still hanging out there. There are some other cities that I've looked at where their ordinances have been upheld, where they didn't say you have to be a resident of the city, but they distinguished between, you know, there was some distinguished between the level of regulation of owner occupied or just occupied property. Someone could have a long-term rental property, have somebody live there who manages.
yeah,
The
I'm not
short-term, so-
tied to owner occupied per se, but,
Right.
you know, let's just use the term on-site management.
Okay,
So, you know, there would be a difference between having an on-site manager, AKA property owner or somebody who lives there, versus, you know.
A whole
just
house.
A whole house.
Right.
Yeah, you have a resident in the house,
yeah.
a real resident, not
Yeah.
Right. Or at least an on-site manager.
Right, yes, that's, so I've looked at several, you know, cases where there have been different tiers of regulation based on those kinds of things, and we can look at that, and, you know, kind of need some, there's still a few tweaks to do, you know, with the city code portion. You know, seeing from some of the council comments and everything, you know, I've been through those a few times, but it's kind of sitting down and merging, what are those comments? Where can we make tweaks to it? Because some of those comments were specifically to that part of it. I think there are a few things that maybe could be clarified, and there are a few issues. I know Councilor Williams had a particular concern, and I've looked at a way possibly to deal with his concern. So, we're, you know, just got to get all that together.
So the reason I ask that is because I do think of those two in different, you know, categories. I think they're distinctly different. And, you know, with the not having a on-site management, you know, presents a higher degree of risk for, you know, some of the unwanted activity happening. But the practical reason for considering making that distinction in the code is, to, you know, with the permitting, to, I don't want to necessarily say incentivize on-site management, but I imagine a scenario in which we treat those two somewhat differently in terms of how we approach, you know, the permitting. Like, you know, I know we're kind of thinking through this 1% cap, and you know, this is just saying this as food for thought. Maybe, you know, there's the 1% cap for the ones that don't have on-site management and the ones that have on-site management. You know, there's a different standard.
And basically, I'm trying to recall, you know, some of the specific, you know, things I've read in cases, they're all kind of running together, but that's generally the idea. The one I'm thinking about, and that's what I'm thinking, I'm sitting here going, I'm gonna regret saying this, but I will say that let me look at some of those cases and kind of pull sort of the schemes that those cities had. It can let the council, you know, look at those, to kind of see what some of those ideas are. But the primary one that I can think of was, as you said, the kind of on-site management situation. The numbers weren't restricted, you know, in certain districts, but the whole house sort of situation was either restricted to certain other districts or were limited in the numbers that they were in districts. It's basically the same idea that you're getting to.
Okay.
So, yeah.
And forgive me, Counselor Abbott, I'm going to ask another question, but now that I'm thinking about it, you know, in that sort of situation, what would the length of stay differentiate that from, say, a boarding house?
Yes, I mean, I think the definitions would be, you know, very different.
So boarding
I
house
think,
is like
yeah.
basically a long, regular rental where the length of stay is greater than 30 days?
It's basically, yeah. Yeah, they are basically, usually a boarding house is more of as the way they exist today, or kind of more of someone's home, you know, it's their residence, but not as much transient. Most boarding houses that operate are not operated like transient housing. So that would be a difference.
I can't think of any
I
that I'm
see
aware
where you're
of.
thinking. I see why you're
I
thinking.
mean, I know
yes,
it
this question is
exists
looking-
in our code.
Yeah.
You know, from a practical standpoint, I don't know that we still have boarding houses.
We do.
We have,
We do.
okay, all
Yeah.
right.
Yes.
People
Enough said.
still board. And usually food is included in a lot of those
Right.
boarding houses.
Yeah,
They-
usually with boarding, yes. I think there's enough differentiation between them, you know, and I mean, it's usually multiple people living in the house, and that's in our regulations. We're restricting having multiple parties renting, you know, the same facility at the same time. So I think we can look at that and make sure we get.
The way we have the regulations written now, it would prohibit multiple groups from renting a room in the same short-term rental. So I couldn't rent a room and then you and Counselor Abbott and Counselor Smitherman, it's just rental by one party. And so the boarding homes are literal rent by room per person.
Okay.
And of course, in single family, we limit to 3 unrelated people can say they're a family. So you can't have more than 3 people in a single family district anyway, whether it's a short-term rental or not. So, I mean, that's in our ordinance, unless somebody changed it when I wasn't looking. So, but, any other questions or comments? I realize this is a lot, and some of it just came in the mail today. So you may not have had a chance to read all of it. So as for the ZAC recommendations, let's just, since there's only 4 of them, we can tick down through here. Their recommendation was that short-term rentals not be permitted in any residential zone district. So I'm good with that. And the reason is we keep on hearing from our professional staffers that we have a housing shortage. And we also have, all of our complaints that we receive are from residential areas. And when we had the multiple, I think there were 3 public hearings, all of the residents, except the ones that were running short-term rentals, were opposed to short-term rentals in our residential zone districts. And all of the owners were in favor of them. So the same people came and said the same things at all 3 public hearings. And that tells me that our residents don't want these things, but the people who are making money off of them do. So we have to decide, in my mind, whether we want to turn our residential areas into commercial areas, or whether we don't want to, and whether we want happy residents or ones that are always mad.
Counselor Abbott, so I think one consideration to take in mind is that if we are talking about on-site managed properties, AKA owner-occupied, those are almost by definition, going to be in residential districts. So, that would, allowing for that would preclude that recommendation. Does that make sense? Did I say that right?
Yeah, and they talked about the people who lived in the homes as opposed to people from Minnesota who buy a house and turn it into a business. But they didn't take any action on that, I think probably because it was late at night and they were worn out from the public hearing. In all of these public hearings, we had 60 and 70 speakers. We've had a lot of people who have come out repeatedly to express their opinions. But, my personal feeling, they don't belong in residential districts. But if we did anything, a property owner or a full-time resident renting out something is different from all these entrepreneurs who buy up 6 and 8 houses on a street and turn them all into short-term rentals.
So,
To me, there's a big difference there.
yeah,
And of course, I'm probably the only one on the council who has one street with 13 of them on it.
right.
And the owners are from all over the United States, but particularly Minnesota. I don't know why people from Minnesota would even know Birmingham existed, but they do.
Right. Well, my personal opinion is that, I would not be in favor of supporting the recommendation that short-term rentals are not permitted in any residential district.
I'm in agreement with Mr. President. I think that's kind of extreme, but I do think we definitely need a cap. Because, I think somebody was telling me, for instance, on their street, it's like every other house is Airbnb. Now, that's not right, because it goes back to Councilor Abbott's point of how can we get residents and young families, or even people who are coming back who are retired, to own a home if it's occupied by Airbnb.
Okay, so y'all are more interested in just the 1% limit and the lottery,
Yeah.
with the little
Yes.
If I really, could get everything that I wanted, there would be some sort of cap on density.
Yeah.
However, we've discussed this previously, and there's some significant challenges to being able to do that. But if those challenges could be overcome, I think that's sort of the ideal situation for us, is to have the 1% cap in residential districts, and then, you know, some sort of prohibition that would prevent the scenario of having 12 Airbnbs on the same street within a small area. So,
That's a 3-block long street.
okay, 12 in 3 blocks then. So, anyway, that's
There's nobody to go borrow a cup of sugar from.
right. Yeah, it's definitely this type of situation that we're trying to avoid.
And I really think it's the enforcement piece that's the most important, especially to me. Because, you know, we could put this ordinance in place, but if we don't enforce it, we're still going to have the same problems. And I feel like a lot of the situations that happen, I'm thinking like Councilor Tate's district, for example, that was more of like an enforcement issue with that, and a safety issue, because, you know, gunfire and noise ordinance, that could happen with people who stay in the neighborhood. So,
Yeah, that's another reason why the education component on the front end is
yeah,
you know, a great idea.
yeah.
Okay, well, the second item that they proposed was that the local responsible party should be located within 10 miles of the property instead of 30.
I would
I agree
accept
with
that.
that, yeah.
And of course, if they live in the house, that's not a problem.
Yeah.
Then, if a random drawing is approved, it should apply to all districts and not just the residential districts.
I think as it's structured currently in draft 3, that the 1% cap would only apply to residential districts, and there wouldn't be any cap on, you know, say mixed use or, yeah. So I personally, I like that configuration. So my preference would be to reject that recommendation.
Okay, so the random drawing would only be applied to residential zone
Yes.
districts. But like in urban neighborhood that are being built specifically for low-income people to live near the nodes on the transit, if you allow those to become short-term rentals, then the poor people that need transit and need a place to live that's affordable will be forced out by people who are running a business, renting rooms.
I'd be willing to compromise on that one.
Yeah, because I'm thinking really a lot of times Airbnbs in general focus more on accessibility to downtown, and I think that's in any city. So I guess that's what happens with like District 9, of course, District 5, District 3, and maybe a little bit mine. People are just trying to stay at Airbnb instead of a hotel to go to like a game or an event, usually.
True.
So,
But
finish
we
your
need
thought.
to make sure that
Yeah.
all the districts get part of that 1%.
Yes,
Because you don't want all the 1% in 3 districts or
Right,
4
exactly.
districts. So
I'm
if
with
they
you.
have to be spread across 9 equally.
I agree.
Of course, we don't know what the 1% is 1% of yet, do we? Do we have a number of residences that we have?
So the 1% will be based off the census data that we have. And right now, it's like, I want to say it's right around 1,600. We have the actual numbers. We pulled it from, but by the time this gets enacted, there may be more updated numbers. So we actually tied it to the census data based on available housing units just in the city limits of Birmingham.
And where did we come up with 1%?
That was what a lot of the other municipalities have done when they've picked a percentage. And the 1%, so if you look at the number of short-term rentals that we think are in the city, it's most likely somewhere between 1 in 2,000. That's kind of our best guess, because we don't have any tracking mechanism right now. And so 1%, we don't want our number of available housing units, like you guys said before, we don't want 10%, because then that only leaves 90% of housing. So the 1% is something that when we were kind of shooting it, going over it and looking at other cities, it seemed to be reasonable that 99% of our housing stock would be available for long-term housing, and then only the 1% for short-term.
Okay.
We can change that number if you guys would like to. It just kind of made sense to us when we were having our discussions.
I just wondered where it came from,
Yeah.
if we just,
We looked at some other cities that had that type of a random drawing, and that's what they chose. And then we read why they chose it, and it seemed to make sense.
okay. And then the number 4 was if short-term rentals are not prohibited in residential districts, they should be allowed by special exception in all districts.
Are we allowed to do that?
Yes, we would be, so we discussed it, but it's, and actually when we first discussed this idea, I was leaning that direction, but subsequently, that would mean that, all 1,600 potentially permits would have to, go through, get neighborhood recommendations and go through the zoning board of adjustments process. So
That's a
it would
lot.
be very, very burdensome. So
But then we'd have an even harder time getting ZBA members.
right. So I've since abandoned,
Okay, but
my
what
support
will,
And I,
for that.
I was gonna say, I think that recommendation was once they said, well, they're not gonna be in residential, the other districts where we allow them, we would require special exception. Isn't that the way it was worded, or that's what I understand? Okay, I didn't understand it then.
No, so we actually went back and listened for like the 20th time to CAC, because the meeting when they made the recommendations, it took like 15 minutes to get to the recommendations.
and there were several recommendations that didn't fly.
Right, and there was discussion, but the final one regarding special exception is that they decided they should be allowed by special exception in all districts if there's not an outright prohibition. So in other words, there was a lot of discussion. Commissioner Pilkerton suggested all of them go to neighborhood associations. And it was like, well, what is the process? You just send them to the neighborhood, and then what happens after that? There has to be some sort of a regulatory process. And so Commissioner King suggested, well, do we go back to ZBA? So that's when they said, yes, we would like the special exception process because it includes the neighborhood component as well as the zoning board of adjustment component. So you kind of get to, there's 2 available meetings for you to come and speak for or against if there's a significant issue with one of the short-term rentals.
What
Okay,
about
well,
the neighborhoods who don't have officers, or we're having issues with neighborhood elections right now, or?
So
We
if
round the
we
quorum.
can't get in touch with neighborhood officers or they don't have any, we reach out to the Community Resource Division and Community Development. Fortunately, we haven't had any cases where there've just been no officers in a number of months. But in that case, our usual procedure is to notify adjacent property owners and then send it to ZBA.
Okay.
So at least the adjacent property owners would receive a notice.
Yeah.
And they would have an opportunity to come to the public hearing at ZBA.
Okay.
And what we, could consider, because there are a number of concerns with the status of some neighborhoods and different things, that's, there are still, we've looked at some cities that have the short-term rental, notify the people in the area of where they're gonna be and that kind of thing. I mean, there's still some things or we can let the residents, require some notice to the residents
Yeah.
of that area without necessarily going through the neighborhood association. Of course, if there is a neighborhood association, then the
Yeah.
information could go to them as well as but, if we have, like we said, 1,600 to require them all to go to neighborhoods and all go through, ZBA, that can be a huge
burdensome.
backlog,
Yeah.
for us,
Well,
so.
on a zoning change, don't we notify everyone within 500 feet?
That's for rezoning.
Yeah,
For rezoning of the property, it's
if-
500 feet. For ZBA, it's adjacent property owners, which is immediately adjacent and across a street or alley.
yeah, but this would affect more than the people who lived on either side, as we've seen from all of the complaints at all of these public hearings. Just the adjacent property owners are not the ones who have problems. So it seems to me that we would need to notify people as if it was a rezoning, just so everyone would know what was going on. You know,
So what Nashville required is that the owner send a certified letter to adjacent property owners. None of the cities that I've researched have required anything above or beyond adjacent. And adjacent is on either side and across the street
but as
and
you said,
behind.
or somebody said in one of their letters, Birmingham is different, and we can't base our ordinance on what everybody else is doing.
Right.
Because we're unique.
And just, so the actual number of housing units that we have as of today is 106,713. So that would make the 1% cap at 1,068.
1,068.
Yes, ma'am, if it was implemented today. And if we did utilize the special exception for ZBA, that would require, if available, neighborhood association meeting, and then in addition to that, we send the adjacent property owner notices.
I feel like I may be in the minority. The notice may be better, just because the attendance at neighborhood meetings is so low, and it doesn't accurately reflect how many people actually live in that community. And there's also an issue of notice of the neighborhood meeting as well. Because, if you have 10 people at a neighborhood meeting, it's like hundreds of people that live in a neighborhood. That doesn't really reflect the issues of people. And then sometimes some neighborhood meetings are doing people work. So I'm really more in favor of like a notice. But I'll be okay with neighborhood meetings, but I think a notice would
Well,
be a lot
ZBA
better, yeah.
requires both.
They require both.
Yes, ma'am. So it would be, the meeting would be an option, and then there would also be the adjacent property owner notices mailed at least a week before the ZBA meeting.
But if you did something other than special exception, just to require notice, that's what I mean, because the special exception would require what she just said, that there's some, if we didn't do the special exception requirement, then some method of process to notify the people who live
Yeah.
around it.
Okay, well, with 106,713 residences in Birmingham, that's 118 per district. And if they all locate themselves around each council member's home, we'll see how it works. Anyway, so we've got to come up with a recommendation to the full council.
Is this going to committee of the whole or automatically to council meeting?
Whatever we decide.
Yeah, we have to, when we decide something, we make a recommendation to the council. So we can't just throw a bunch of stuff up in the air and hope it lands somewhere. We've got to, Julie's got to put it down on paper, and Kim has to help her. So, we've got some decisions to make. And this thing has dragged out a long time, but it's an important thing because the residents of Birmingham are so angry about these things that if we mess it up,
Right.
you know, it'll be bad. So we gotta get it right. And if we don't do things that address that anger of the residents that we already have, then, you know, we as council members have failed. And I don't want to go out as a failure. So, ladies, do we have enough here to put something new on paper to bring back to the committee? Or do you want us to write up our thoughts? Or, you know, somebody's got to put it together. We can do it ourselves, but since you've already done all this, you'd have to send us all the spreadsheets and the Word documents so we could modify them, and that would probably be messy.
We will do whatever the committee recommends.
Okay, so regarding number one, so y'all want to let short-term rentals be in the residential neighborhoods and with a cap on density of 1%, and we're going to come up with a way that they're not all located in the same area, and we'll have 118 per district limit. But we still got to come up with a way where one street doesn't have 13
Yeah.
on it.
Yeah. I
So,
think that's what you said about the density, but are we still talking about having a differentiation between occupied and not occupied too?
That would be my preference.
yeah, well, I think having someone living in the house who's responsible for it would help to eliminate a lot of the complaints, because I know you've attended all three public hearings, and I know, Kim, I think you attended all three, and I took voluminous notes, and the residents are the ones who are angry. The owners are pretty happy. So we've got to address the residents because they are the residents. So how do we I mean, we have the lottery, and people they win, and they get to put a short-term rental somewhere, but they can't put them all on the same street, so how are we gonna deal with that?
And I guess I have another question too, related to the occupied. Are we going to limit, are we going to include those that have an on-site live-in management? Are they going to be limited, or just the ones that are whole house limited? We need to know that.
What?
Yeah, so she's talking about the 1% cap. Would the on-site management STRs be included under the 1% cap? And I think,
Well, they'd have to be, because we have a housing shortage. We keep on forgetting that we have a housing shortage, and we'll be taking houses out of the mix for people
Right.
who need a place to live, and instead we'll have people coming with luggage.
But if they're occupied as places where people are living, I mean,
Yeah,
those would be
one-
houses, those would be ones where, I mean, that's my question is, if it's somewhere where we have somebody living, whether they own the property or they've got a long-term lease to live in the property, and we allow rentals from there, are we talking about limiting those, because those are residents of the city? Or are we, you know, versus you get the key and the whole house is yours for the weekend?
yeah, so we're all thinking out loud here. I think my preference would be to include those under the 1% cap, because I think part of me, wants to differentiate those STRs that have on-site management from those that don't. But how do you create, some sort of benefit to having on-site management within the structure of the code? I don't know. But I think that having, them outside of the 1% cap, creates some problems too. So,
We can draft it the way you're suggesting. As I said, I will pull some of those other cities' ordinances that have so far withstood legal challenge, where they have some differentiation, and let y'all look at those. But we'll draft it, that way. So,
yeah. I think
because
that's
it
the
is,
cleanest way.
it's hard to conceive, but let you, let you look at some of the things that have been looked at and decide if that's anything you want to do.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think it's
because
just cleaner.
if they were outside the 1% limit, then all the existing ones could just get somebody to live in one of the rooms and say they're the on-site manager, and then you've still got 13 on one street.
Right,
And a whole apartment complex that's all the units have been turned into short-term rentals. So
right.
you can't, if you're gonna stop the neighborhoods from being taken over, you gotta have a limit somewhere.
Right.
Okay, so what else do we want? We still got the random drawing, and it'll apply to all 9 districts, but not commercial districts, just the residential.
I think we said no
Districts.
to that. I thought we did. I thought we said no to that. Did we not?
So,
And we still have to have the random drawing, because then how will we?
so, yes, so the random drawing would be approved, but it would only apply to the 1%.
In residential districts.
Right. And urban neighborhood.
Urban neighborhood. And then if the 1%, if it was 10 and you only had 9 applicants, there would be no need for the drawing.
Right.
Everyone would get their permit.
Yeah, if you didn't have interest. Okay, so that gets us to, well, the last one, the special exception, we decided to do that.
Yeah, I don't support the special exception. I think it's just too problematic.
Well, how are you gonna get the neighborhoods involved in it if you don't have a special exception?
Well, the way I look at it is that, my neighbor right now, could rent their house to whoever they want to, and they don't have to notify me. So,
It's the transient part.
yeah.
Coming and going and coming and going and coming and going.
But I really may still dislike the person who they rent to next to me.
Well, you might dislike your neighbor who owns his house.
Right. Yeah. But anyway, for that reason and for the complexity and the whole neighborhood politics component and the workload for the ZBA, I just think that that's not feasible.
So would you like for us, when we give you this additional information, to provide you with some of the language that from the other cities where the adjacent owners are notified, but it's the duty of the applicant, and then they provide evidence to us with their permit application that they have done that?
Well, see, I still think we need the special exception, so I
Okay.
differ from my colleague over here because I have neighborhoods where people attend and they're fired up and they're not happy with what's going on in our neighborhoods, and so I don't think ghosting them and pretending like nothing's going on and that they can't know about it, I think that's a bad idea, and I'm not even running for reelection, but y'all are.
Yeah, so let me offer a compromise. If you required the STRs that did not have on-site management to get the special exception, that might be a way to proceed forward. So the ones that that are owner occupied or have a on-site manager wouldn't be required to get the special exception, whereas those that were not owner occupied or did not have on-site management would be required to get the special exception in order to be permitted. Does that make sense?
No, basically, you're saying the whole house rental would require the special exception.
Right.
Yeah.
I still think it's gonna be challenging.
Yeah, like honestly, I don't, the whole issue with the special exceptions is we're gonna have a large number of cases. The agenda for ZBA will be covered with short-term rentals. And it's, you know, we already have usually 10 to 15 cases twice a month anyway. And we have challenges right now with attendance and obtaining a quorum. So, our concern as staff is adding that to the list of special exceptions, if there's any other way to address it without the ZBA process.
So my baseline is not to go that direction, but, you know, if we have to reach a compromise, then that's what I'm proposing.
Yeah, I just don't think we can leave the neighborhoods out. I mean, how are you gonna explain that you are the one that allowed that to happen?
So.
What if they receive a notice, like we had originally talked about, there's not an actual, they wouldn't take an actual vote, but we would send them a monthly notice, and when we receive an application in their neighborhood, and then we would also have a notice requirement that the applicant would have to notify the adjacent property owners that they're applying for the permit. There's no actual decision-making, but that way they're notified and they will have a list of all of the short-term rentals that have applied for permits in their neighborhood. And then once they are selected in the process, we can send a follow-up notice where the short-term rentals were selected in their neighborhood.
Yeah, I mean, but
And
I
they'll
guess
just be told.
right, so it would just
It would be for information purposes.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, in all honesty, a special exception is health, safety, and welfare of the general public. So unless a neighborhood, if a special exception goes to the neighborhood, it's a new short-term rental owner, and they want to open a short-term rental on a street, and if the neighbors just say, well, we have 4, we don't want a 5th, the board has no standing to deny it. How does that impact the health, safety, and welfare of the general public? The standards for special exception are a lot looser, I think. And I'm just not sure, unless you have evidence of a repeat offender, loud parties, parking all over the street, the celebratory gunfire or the non-celebratory gunfire, it's going to be extremely difficult for ZBA legally to not approve a special exception anyway. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they sort of get granted by default.
I mean, they still will hear all of the evidence, and it's still, a quasi-judicial process. So it would allow for an appeal to circuit court. But based off what the law tells us we can review for a special exception, there's just not a lot of wiggle room for them unless there is documented evidence that the short-term rental will tend to impair the health, safety, and welfare of the general public. And that will be put upon the neighborhood. It will be their responsibility to prove that for the board to vote against it. And in my almost 18 years, there have been a couple special exceptions that have not been granted, but they are much easier to get approved than, say, a variance or a modification. So that's just something for y'all to consider as well. Because I don't want you to think that just because we're doing the special exception, that's going to catch everything, because unfortunately it won't.
Right. So you guys are saying as a option to not requiring the special exception, that some sort of notification of adjacent residents could be another alternative.
Yeah, we could require notice to, within a certain distance. If you wanted to do 100 feet, 500 feet, we could put that in there that they have to notify all property owners within 500 feet. They also have to submit, or we have to submit to the neighborhood associations that we've received a permit application for that particular address. At least so they're still in the know about what's going on. And it's not like, oh, a short-term rental moved in yesterday.
Can we encourage, maybe put like the word encourage them to go to neighborhood meetings instead of required?
I don't know if we
Or
can.
are we gonna have to still, you can't?
Let me think on that. I mean, I don't think it hurts to suggest that they communicate with the neighborhoods, themselves and make, have some kind of communication. I mean, we can do that. Basically, the way the citizens participation plan is set up, the city's obligation is to notify the neighborhoods of certain things that
Of
are
course,
happening.
yeah.
And really, that's it.
Okay, because I was saying in addition to that, maybe if they wanted to be under old and new business for a neighborhood meeting, just to come to talk
Yeah.
to them.
And I will say from talking with different applicants for other things, sometimes neighborhoods refuse to put people on. I've had to deal with, numbers of complaints of those kinds of things. And so people get held up, or they get held up by the neighborhood association for long periods of time. And, which really go beyond, say, the processing time that's required by, say, the ABC board and things like that for certain licenses. I don't mind having something that encourages the communication and relationship with the neighborhoods and with the neighbors, themselves. But I just want to be
Yeah.
careful about what we build in.
Well, I personally don't think we can leave the neighborhoods out, because I think
I'm
if
not
we
saying
do,
leave them out.
there will be
Yeah.
repercussions.
Yes.
And after all, our neighborhood system is one of the glories of the city of Birmingham, even though we have a few areas where people have given up. We're still sending the liquor licenses, and we're still sending zoning requests and ZBA requests to them to look at and give their opinions, and this is the kind of thing that affects a neighborhood.
Yeah, and I'm not saying leave them out. I'm saying it's, it's the question. This is drafted as an administratively issued permit. So, they check the boxes, staff looks at everything looks okay, staff issues the permit. We have provisions, and I'd have to pull out the draft, but we have provisions for someone appealing the denial to the city council. Again, I never want a staff member to be the final decision maker for the city that gets appealed.
It needs to go to the neighborhoods, definitely then. Appeals definitely need to go to the neighborhoods.
Yeah, and so that's, we can look at other ways, that we could incorporate. Someone could always, we can always incorporate them. Just, again, as Councilor Quinn said, thinking, off the top of my head, just throwing out ideas for discussion. But, if we let them know and somebody says, hey, we've got a problem, then that's something that they can consider in the permit. And if we decide to deny that on that basis, it gets to the council. And so people would have the ability to come and speak at the council. And I mean, that's really the important thing, is that, and actually I've seen some of the guidance for the neighborhood presidents. It says, yeah, you can hear it, you can vote on it, but the important thing is if somebody feels strongly about this, they have to show up at the council meeting and speak against it. It need, on these different applications. As a neighborhood vote's one thing, but the council needs that direct testimony to hear in applications. So the council meeting, the council hearing is the important thing that happens.
I would suggest that, it sounds like we're going down the direction of, at a minimum, requiring some notice to adjacent property owners, if not the, entire neighborhood. But I would suggest that that notice also include the contact information for the property owner, and, a management company or whoever their registered agent is.
So Counselor Abbott, I guess what is your preference as far as making sure the neighborhood associations are taken care of?
Well, I think that certainly the staff needs to,
Notice.
the staff would need to notify the neighborhood officers that a request is made for a certain address to become an STR. And then the idea of the notification by the property owner, the applicant, if he is the property owner, I guess he'd have to be according to the ordinance, of the STR would contact all property owners within 500 feet
Yes.
and let them know, those are the people who'll be affected.
Exactly. Okay. I'm good with
And,
that.
and then we have to go back to the parking ordinance and fix it so that it actually requires parking for these places. Because in neighborhoods that already don't have parking sufficient for residents, you can't have 5 SUVs with a bunch of people piling out of them, taking all the parking up. You just can't, you can't do that to the residents of Birmingham. We certainly don't want to do it.
Yeah.
So that's just another note to modify the city's parking ordinance yet again. So notification of, by the applicant, property owner of all the the owners within 500 feet, certainly not all the renters. So the staff notification of neighborhood officers, notification of nearby property owners. And then the random drawing applies to residential and urban neighborhood only, right?
Right.
But the total number of units is still limited to 1,068 citywide, and that's 118 per
No,
district.
Because in mixed use, downtown, they wouldn't be capped.
Well, you're getting back to our housing shortage. If we have a housing shortage, I mean, do we have one or is it a lie? Who's telling the truth here? Because you're in favor of taking up housing units as rentals, rental rooms, and overnight hotel rooms. So if you take those up, where are people going to live? We have to balance this.
I'm in favor of the way it's been structured by the staff,
And how is that?
which is
The
the
1% would only apply to residential and urban neighborhood districts.
Right.
And then everything else is just whatever. And
So
you
the
don't care
mixed
about
use
people
district.
having a place to live. They can move to Walker County. Because we either have a housing shortage or we don't. No, this isn't a public hearing. There are site management concept,
Right. So,
but it will count.
So what would be, how would we differentiate that they're still part of the 1%? So there's really no benefit to have on-site management if, or,
I don't know, think of something.
Come up with a benefit.
Yeah. But, okay, so now that we've sort of, explicitly stated what we're looking for, I would like to give staff an opportunity to work with what we've spelled out for them and have them come back to us.
Yeah, P and Z, I agree. Which will be in January, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
January.
Would it be possible for us to have like towards the second meeting in January to give us some time? So,
You want time?
yes, ma'am.
You don't want to have Christmas, do you? Yeah, I think the second meeting in
Yeah.
January would be fine, because we really need to get this right. And we need to remember who our clients are, and sometimes we forget.
That's why we're thankful for you, Counselor Abbott.
Beg your pardon?
That's why we're thankful for you.
And we might have an update on the educational piece by
Yeah,
then.
I'm gonna take this home and read it, because Lord knows we need education in every aspect of our lives.
And Counselor Abbott, if somebody has comments, is it okay if they email us or?
Oh, sure.
Yeah, so
sure.
we just email
Email,
us.
snail mail, and I will go ahead and type up all of the comments that were made at all of the public hearings, so that y'all can just read a little synopsis of what people had to say, because the people who came and made the most
And don't forget
vociferous-
our town hall meetings in April, the comments from those two meetings. We had two public meetings in April as well. So we've had a
Okay, well,
total,
you've got notes on the ones that you held at,
yeah, we've
Can you
had
send that to
5
us?
public opportunities.
because they had one at
First
Crossplex, they had one at
Shields.
Shield Center that very few people knew about, but some people did.
Yeah.
But I wasn't at those, so you'll have to come up with all the meeting minutes from those. But I just wrote down people's comments, both pro and con, and mostly got their names, except I'm sure some of them are badly spelled.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
Yeah, I started doing that one time, and then I got off in the weeds. Okay,
And
so,
then one of your handouts, Counselor Smitherman, does have all of the questions
Yeah.
from the 4-hour ZAC meeting.
Okay.
And that, I think a lot of the questions were captured in that one also.
yeah, there's a lot of question and answers.
There's a section that's labeled as council comments, and I've been through that several times, and there are some questions in there, but they aren't really legal questions or questions that can really be answered. Some of them are kind of rhetorical, but those comments and questions will be taken into account in looking at further tweaks to it.
And also the educational piece to see if that's something we can include as well.
And it certainly should be a requirement, because the trouble that we've had is not from the
Yes.
good operators, it's from the yahoos. But there's been a lot of it, as we know. So, and the other thing is, we have to come up with a way to space these things out so there aren't 13 on a 3-block street. So I know that y'all say it's hard to space things out, but with online mapping and AI, I just find it difficult to believe that we can't figure out when a requested site is within 500 feet of another one.
The issue is not us locating them, the issue is, so let's say they have to be 20 feet from each other, just a random number. The issue that other cities that we've called have said is that if you say, okay, the permit goes effective January 1st, we open at 8 a.m., you can only have a short-term rental permit if you're not within 20 feet of another one. That they had people lined up a week before January 1st, camping out on their sidewalks to be able to get their one spot on their street. And there's no easy way to pick who goes first. Do you say first come, first serve? Is it whoever
that's why
emails
y'all
their
made that little-
application
Yeah.
first.
Didn't y'all create that little basket thing that looked like a bingo basket to?
That's for the drawing.
That's
That's
for the
why we thought the
1%.
drawing would help, but that doesn't address, you know, you
The
could
spacing.
technically draw two people next door to each other because it's a random drawing. So that doesn't address the spacing. But that was an attempt to try to mitigate the proliferation of them across the entire city.
Yeah, and we've got to do that, because you just can't have a pile of them in a residential neighborhood, especially since our zoning ordinance says our residential neighborhoods are for residents.
We can call some more folks and see if they have any, what might have worked for them. But other than the first in line, I'm not sure what the solution to that problem is.
Yes, randomness is hard to come up with. But we've got to do something, because the problem is already here. We don't even have to guess that it could happen, because it's already here. And the lady who's got one on either side of her, one behind her, and one across the street, she's going to come get us. So, you know, we've got to deal with the problems as well as the opportunities here. And I'm glad that Dr. O'Quinn is so optimistic, because he overcomes my reality.
That's how you balance
It-
things, right?
It's all a compromise. Everything's compromise. So,
Unless it's you who's being disturbed.
right.
Okay, so do you think we've got enough to let this meeting go and move on to our rest of our day? Do y'all?
Yep.
Okay, second meeting in January.
Okay, I was just gonna
And then if
confirm.
something goes wrong, we'll just modify.
That'll be January 22nd.
Yeah, and we'll make modifications if we need to. Okay, is there anything else before we adjourn? Do we have a motion?
Second.
It has been moved and properly seconded